name is Joe. I'm an addict. How's everybody tonight? Good. Is anyone here for the very first time at a position neutrality meeting tonight? Good. One or two of you. First of all, welcome. And second, let me warn you in advance, you're liable to experience us just a little different than other meetings of other fellowships you may have attended. The primary reason that's liable to happen is that we intend for you to have a different experience here. What we do here is we take a look at the suggested instruction for a step or so a week directly out of this book. And we use this book in crystal meth anonymous. Why? The process described by the authors of this book has been proven to work for addicts of the hopeless variety, addicts to alcohol and other substances. So although we call it a study, so people kind of get their head around what we're doing, what it really is a sharing. I'm going to show you how I find my experience in the book, encourage you to have your experience, and if we both do our job, we'll share a spiritual experience in this room tonight. Fair enough? Yep. How many of you have been here before and can witness for these folks that happened? So what they're showing you from their show of hands is that in 12-step recovery, when we speak of a spiritual experience, we're talking about a sensory experience. You'll feel it. And when you do, I'll know and I'll call it to your attention. Because we would cheat you to talk to you about the power we call God without a demonstration of the power. Fair enough? Yeah. All right, so tonight we're in step 4. How many of you are excited about that? Oh, yeah. And step 4, instructions start on page 63 of our book in that chapter, How It Works. And they're down on the bottom of page 63, the very last paragraph. Are you with me? Yeah. It says, next, we launched out on a course of vigorous action. So this is their experience. Who's we in this book? The first 100, and their experience with the first several thousand, right? So how many of you would describe your first effort at a 4-step inventory as something less than a launching? So I don't know why that might be. Perhaps they knew something we didn't know. Perhaps their desperation was greater. But they're witnessing to being very eager to dash into this experience that many of us have been avoiding. Right. So we're going to try and take the mystery out of it, see if we can help people understand why they might be so eager. Fair enough? Fair enough. So it says, the first step of which is a personal house cleaning, which many of us had never attempted. Though our decision was a vital and crucial step, it could have little permanent effect unless at once followed by a strenuous effort to face and be rid of the things in ourselves which had been blocking us. Our liquor was but a symptom, so we had to get down to causes and conditions. How many of you have discovered after being here for a while, or even out in active addiction, that maybe whatever chemical it was you chased in here was not the main problem? How many of you discovered that because you sobered up for a time and then returned to active addiction? So clearly, if it was just the chemical, that wasn't the main problem, right? There was something underlying. So you understand that? Now, where do we find this power that we call God in recovery? They told us that in the step 2 experience. They told us where and how, and they told us how we would experience it, right? So how do we find this power? Sometimes we had to search fearlessly. So possibly the reason they were in such a hurry is they desperately needed power. How many of you can remember your first day or days and you're like, this isn't going to go well if something doesn't... So they desperately needed power, and someone was there to say the power is found within you, but you're going to have to follow this process in order for you to know that. Does that make sense? Okay. So what are they talking about? The decision was a vital and crucial step. Which decision? Third step. How many of you made a third step decision or thought you did, then showed back up at the rooms, and they said, what happened? And you said, I don't know, man. And they said, well, you just didn't turn it over. You need to turn it over. Did you ever hear that shit? Yeah. You're thinking, dude, I thought I turned it over. I said that fucking prayer. What? Anyone know what I'm talking about? Okay, well, the prayer is asking for power to move through the process. So if you didn't go through the process, either you didn't encounter the power in 2, or it wasn't properly explained to you that the power was going to come on you as you move through the process. We tend to become more aware of power flowing through us when we offer it to another, which means you may not have a third step experience until you're in your 12th step. So we got to help people understand that. How many of you have had an experience as a result of the steps and is now working with others? How many of you have had much more profound experiences of the Spirit when you offered it to someone else? Of course we do. Okay, there you go. Okay, so we had to get down to causes and conditions. Can you see why they had to do it now?
Yeah.
Okay, do you think we might have to do it?
Yes.
Okay, so therefore we started upon a personal inventory. This was step 4. A business which takes no regular inventory usually goes broke. Taking a commercial inventory is a fact-finding and a fact-facing process. It's an effort to discover the truth about the stock in trade. One object is to disclose damaged or unsaleable goods, to get rid of them promptly and without regret. If the owner of the business is to be successful, he cannot fool himself about values. We did exactly the same thing with our lives. Sorry I read so much. I know our attention spans aren't that good. It's painful for me too. But we have to get that entire paragraph out and then go back in and deconstruct it, because this is their witness. This isn't a theory of theirs. This is their experience. So they told us 2 things: that they had to get down to the truth about the stock in trade. So what is the stock in trade?
Us.
Me.
Our lives.
Right? Okay. And what is the truth? As opposed to my truth or your truth. How many of you discovered there might be a little difference between your truth about you, other people's truth about you, and the truth about you?
Yeah. Yes.
So this is a process to sort of narrow that gap. Does that make sense? Okay. And then it goes on to say that one object is to identify those damaged or unsaleable goods. How many of you thought this was just a trash hunt? You were just trying to get that dirty little secret out about you. Well, sometimes we teach that. I've heard it in the fellowship, but that's not it. They told us in the second step, what is the ultimate goal of this inventory? Get down to the great reality within us. In the last analysis, it's only there that he may be found. So it's a search for the truth, which is who we really are versus who we think we are. How many of you had limiting thoughts about yourself and found yourself in a self-defeating loop? So if you knew the truth about you, who you really were versus who you thought you were, then all of a sudden you'd start moving into your destiny, wouldn't you? Because you wouldn't let the fears drive you back to those labels. Any of you have labels for yourself? Okay. Okay, so it says we did exactly the same thing with our lives. We took stock honestly. First we searched out the flaws in our makeup which caused our failure. Being convinced that self, manifested in various ways, was what had defeated us, we considered its common manifestation. What do they mean by self manifesting in various ways?
The way I react.
Might be?
Thought process.
Self-centered.
How many of you have had the experience of wanting to be one person and actually pulling it off at times, but then found some people you wanted to impress, so you became another person? That was your self-manifesting. How many of you got confused by all those roles and you found out you were a better actor than you thought you were? Those are the kinds of things that happen. They're going to help us deconstruct how self manifests based on fear, which they talk to us in 3, right? Okay, so first thing they want to take a look at is resentment. It's the number 1 offender. How many of you got here really pissed off? How many of you were just pissed at you? I hear both sides. Pissed is pissed. So it's still bad for us, okay? It destroys more alcoholics than anything else. From it stem all forms of spiritual disease. For we've not only been mentally and physically ill, we've been spiritually sick. How many of you have trouble with the idea of being spiritually sick? If you come here with the idea of atheism or not agnosticism, then the idea of anything spiritual might be troubling, yeah?
Yep.
But spiritually sick simply is meaning I just don't have any consciousness of my identity. Any of you live in a way that really you found appalling when you're out there? Like, do you ever notice when animals are sick and their fur's matted, you know right away that animal's sick? How come when you look that way you don't know that you're sick? Oh, somebody's feeling that. Who felt that? That's the power we call God. It doesn't come from the podium, it emanates in you. Okay. All right, so when the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. So the reason I might want to do this is whether I believe I'm spiritually sick or not, I'm definitely not in my best effort right now. Yes? In active addiction. Okay. In dealing with resentments, we set them on paper. That'd be new behavior for most of us, wouldn't it? How many of you dealt with your resentments and maybe still do deal with your resentments by sharing them with your friends?
Or on a bar stool.
Or on a bar stool, right? Okay, so we're going to, instead of poisoning the consciousness with my thoughts about people, places, and things, I'm going to put them on paper. Does that make sense? Okay. In dealing with resentments, we set them on paper. We listed people, institutions, or principles with whom we were angry. We ask ourselves why we were angry. So a lot of people don't get the inventory because it's already filled out, but there's a why I'm angry, and what I'm angry at, and then why I'm angry. And they're two separate columns. Fill them out one at a time so you don't get yourself in a kerfuffle. Give them each a page because you may find out you got a lot more information than you thought you had. How many of you, once you started writing, found out you had a lot more to say than you thought you had? Okay. In most cases, it was found that our self-esteem, our pocketbooks, our ambitions, our personal relationships, including sex, were hurt or threatened, so we were sore, we were burned up. How many of you found that your relationships, your attachments to the world would cause you suffering if you thought they were threatened?
Yes.
Your job, your housing, your significant other, anything like, you know what I'm talking about? Okay. So on our grudge list, we set opposite each name our injuries. Was it our self-esteem, our security, our ambitions, our personal or sex relations which have been interfered with? So that's another column, and we're looking at how many of you found the closer the relationship, the more of those bells were hurt. So almost all the whistles went off if it was somebody close to us, right? How many of you's solution was, I'm not going to get close to anyone again? How many of you found you still suffered from your thoughts about them even though you were isolated from them? So the main problem centers in the mind, yes? Okay. Okay, so we're usually as definite as this example, and then they lay it out. So I'm going to jump to the bottom. It says, we went back through our lives. Nothing counted but thoroughness and honesty. Why? Why would I want to be thorough and honest?
Because I'm going to show you the truth about
My life depends on it.
Did you hear Sean? How many of you knew when you got here, at least, that you desperately needed power or you were going to be back where you were? Where's the power found? Deep down inside. How do we find it? Searching in fearless moral inventory to identify the truth about me. Look at those pomps, those calamities, those worships that have obscured my consciousness of my real identity. The guy I want to be versus the guy I think I am or society tells me I am. Okay. When we were finished, we considered it carefully. Why would I want to consider this carefully? It's arming me with the facts about me so I can bear witness properly. What I was like, what happened, what I'm like now. When I bear witness to the restoration I'm experiencing, I get more power. How many of you are biblically inclined? By the blood of the Lamb and the word of my testimony. Revelation. Yeah? Okay. When we were finished, we considered it carefully. The first thing apparent was that this world and its people were often quite wrong. How many of you discovered that? How many times today did you discover that? So that's not a new discovery. It's a good thing this is a manner of living and not a workbook exercise, right? How many of you have been sober a while and found out today that the world and its people are often quite wrong? Where's my people over 10 years? Yeah, okay. So that's an ongoing experience, and if we don't discipline the thought life, we're going to suffer, yes?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so to conclude that others were wrong were as far as most of us ever got. The usual outcome was that people continued to wrong us, and we stayed sore. How many of you thought everything was great, and you got up and you went out, and then all of a sudden someone reminded you things weren't great? And you thought it was them. And you didn't realize you were seeing them through the lens of your thoughts. Anybody ever been attached to a thought? And long after the person left, you were still suffering? So is the manner of living starting to make sense now? Why we constantly discipline our thoughts as we go along? Okay, so we're learning the practice of that now. And we're learning what our thoughts are showing us as opposed to what people are showing us. Okay, so sometimes it was remorse and then we were sore at ourselves. You ever been sore at yourself? But the more we fought and tried to have our own way, the worse matters got. Guys, they're warning us about something. The people that encourage us just to keep fighting We do not fight with illusions. When we do, we strengthen the illusion. We got to let the thought go, discipline our thought life, turn our thoughts to others. Does that make sense? Yep. Okay. So, as in war, the victor only seemed to win. Our moments of triumph were short-lived. It's plain that a life which includes deep resentment leads only to futility and unhappiness. Why is it so plain to them?
Years of experience.
They inventory. Remember, this book's written in past tense, so they're on the other side of it.
Yep.
How many of you found yourself living in a life of futility and unhappiness and realized that a lot of it was created in your own mind? Past events. Okay. All right, so to the precise extent that we permit these, do we squander the hours that might have been worthwhile? How many of you did not know you were permitting the suffering in your mind? I didn't have a clue. Powerless is not a theory. I'm so out in the illusion, I don't even know what's really going on around me. And even the people who are trying to help me, I don't recognize them, because why would you help someone like me? Anyone know what I'm talking about? Yes. Okay. All right, so this business of resentment is infinitely grave. We found that but with the alcoholic whose hope is the maintenance and growth of a spiritual experience, this business of resentment is infinitely grave. We found that it's fatal. A lot of years in recovery, people have taught us the goal of recovery is abstinence. That's false teaching. The goal of recovery is a spiritual awakening. If abstinence is the byproduct, great. But without the awakening, I've already demonstrated I don't live well in the world if I'm not anesthetized. Anyone know what I'm talking about? Yeah. Okay. All right, so we found that it's fatal, for when harboring such feelings, we shut ourselves off from the sunlight of the Spirit. The insanity of alcohol returns and we drink again, and with us to drink is to die. If we were to live, we had to be free of anger. Does that sound like a lofty goal to some? Yep. They're always talking about states of being, right? So you're going to re-experience anger. It's what you do with that anger when you re-experience it. Does that make sense? Yep. That's why the practices are going to become disciplines, watching my thoughts. Starting to make sense what we're doing here? Okay, so the grouch and the brainstorm were not for us. So now they're telling us how I seed my resentments. How many of you have had an expectation of how someone would behave without knowing it, did something for them you thought was selfless, they did not respond appropriately, and now you had seeded a resentment? So watching our thought life would be useful, wouldn't it? The other thing we do is we run around griping. How many of you have found out that you were a much more negative person than you thought? And you kept setting boundaries and found out you were the toxic motherfucker. I hear that all the time. I gotta stay away from toxic people. You have to go drown yourself then. So we're walking around complaining. That's a grouch. How about the brainstorm? You got that one? That's an old English word.
The problem centers in my mind, so I can't keep it up there and kick it around, because I will.
And the brainstorm might be a sudden fit of rage. Any of you just thought you were doing good and then went off? And it also might be that bright idea that causes you to launch out on a course of vigorous action without considering the consequence. Any of you ever had a really good idea and later found out it might have been better to pause? Okay. So they may be the dubious luxury of normal men, but for alcoholics these things are poison. Why for alcoholics versus normal men? Because normal men are just regular examples of self-will run riot. I'm alcoholic. I'm an extreme example of self-will run riot, and I don't think so. So I'm much more likely to launch into a kerfuffle than they are. Yes? Okay. We turn back to the list, for it held the key to the future. So what's the key to the future?
True relief.
The truth, the great reality, my identity. Yes? Okay. So we were prepared to look at it from an entirely different angle. We began to see that the world and its people really dominated us. In that state, the wrongdoing of others, fancied or real, had the power to actually kill. How could we escape? When they put a question mark in this book, they want you to go inward. Every time you see a question mark in this book, that's a question for you to ask yourself. Eyesight without insight is spiritual blindness. So if you don't have insight of what you're seeing, what your perspective's showing you, you will suffer from illusions. How many of you have noticed that what you perceived as wrongdoing of others was often just a wrong perspective once you talked it through? Because no one thinks about me quite as often as I think about me. Right? Okay. So then it says, how could we escape? So that would be the question, right? If I'm suffering in my thought life from all these things I perceive, then how I would escape from my thought life would be an interesting thing to learn. Yes? Okay. So we saw that these resentments must be mastered, but how? Another question. Are you with them? Do I need to somehow get mastery over my resentments so that I can release them? Okay? We could not wish them away any more than alcohol. So what does it sound like the first thing they tried was? They tried to wish them away. They wouldn't tell you they could not if they had not tried, because it's a book of experience. How many of you tried to wish away your resentments? Every one of us, if we're honest. It didn't work, did it? And we usually learned that when we re-encountered someone who manifested that resentment, yes? Okay. This was our course. We realized that the people who wronged us were perhaps spiritually sick. So that would help to put me in a better place if I would cut them some slack based on my experience, yes?
Yep.
Okay. So though we did not like their symptoms and the way these disturbed us, they, like ourselves, were sick too. So what are their symptoms?
Resentment, fear, guilt, shame, remorse.
Yeah, those things I mentioned: selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear, right? The very same things that I learn about me, I'm learning about them. Does it make sense?
Yep.
Okay. They, like ourselves, were sick too. We asked God to help us show them the same tolerance, pity, and patience that we would cheerfully grant a sick friend.
Yep.
Now, what they're not saying, that's been taught for years wrongly in the fellowship, is pray for them. You will pray for them eventually because you really will want better for them. But at this stage of your development, what you want to do is separate your thoughts about the situation from the human involved.
Right.
So I'm going to ask for power to treat them kinder than I feel like treating them in this moment. Give me the power to show them patience. Do you understand what I'm saying? I will come to believe based on a power greater than me, allowing me to tolerate the intolerable. To be kind when I don't feel like... Have you ever been able to be kind when you didn't feel like being kind?
Yes.
You realize that's what they're talking about, a power greater than you? It's just operating in you and you got confused and thought, I responded well. Have you ever thought that took credit for what was done through you? We all do it. But it would be a good idea to grow in consciousness, because once we know that's tangible power, we'll seek to improve it. Does that make sense? Okay. So when a person offended, we said to ourselves, this is a sick man. How can I be helpful to him? Have you ever thought, this is a sick man, how can I be helpful to him, and found yourself telling them exactly what you needed to hear through you?
Absolutely.
That's always what's going to happen, because they are reflecting how you're thinking and feeling. They're not causing it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Some of you thought that was deep. I think that's bullshit, but it was deep. Have to have your experience. Well, you think that sometimes. Okay, God saved me from being angry. Thy will be done. So in this context, what's God's will?
Anything that's going on.
Whatever's going on. If I'm suffering from what's going on, then I need to get a different perspective. And that doesn't mean shit doesn't go wrong. It's just saying I'll be empowered to go through wrong or right. Got nothing to do with me. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So we avoid retaliation or argument. We wouldn't treat sick people that way. If we do, we destroy our chance of being helpful. So how many of you have found when you went out to help somebody and then you got in an argument with them because of something, you were no longer useful to them?
Yep.
We cannot help people we judge. You're either there to advocate for them or to prosecute them. You can't be both. How many of you made it to a courtroom on the way here? You notice how the defense and the prosecution had separate tables and they didn't just jump from one to the other? You got to pick a side. Okay. All right, so we cannot be helpful to all people, but at least God will show us how to take a kindly and tolerant view of each and every one. How many of you have had the experience of God showing you how to take a kindly and tolerant view? Did you notice you still were disturbed about the behavior, but you got through it, you didn't mistreat them, and you didn't carry that interaction away with you? That's the whole point. Okay. Referring to our list again, putting out of our minds the wrongs others had done, we resolutely look for our own mistakes. That's why it helps sometimes to have what we call a sponsor. When we go to look for our own part, it sometimes eludes us. And we got to find our part, because if I don't find my part, I'm still attached to the event. You understand?
Yep.
Okay. Where had we been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened? You notice how they chased it all the way back to the fear that caused the original manifestation.
Yep.
Do you understand how they start with a condition I find myself in? So it's not enough to check the box, all humans are selfish, dishonest, resentful, and afraid. But as an addict, I need to see how I was acting, how I recognized my selfishness, how I was acting, which was my conditioning exercise to put me in that condition, where the lie was. Not my lie to you, my lie to me. I can't lie to you until I lie to me first. You don't deserve the truth. You won't like me if I tell you the truth. Some manifestation of me, doubting who I am, will cause me to become an inauthentic version of me, and then you won't like me and I won't like me either. Make sense? Okay. So, though a situation had not been entirely our fault, we tried to disregard the other person involved entirely. Where were we to blame? So they want me to keep focusing inward. As much as I desperately want it to be about them, even if I had nothing to do with it, I've got to find my part. Even if my part is only unforgiveness,
Right.
if the event happened years ago and I'm still suffering from it, do I not want to unpack?
Right.
The unpacking process will be required. In order to help someone through that experience, I have to not have malice about that experience. Does it make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So the inventory was ours, not the other man's. When we saw our faults, we listed them. We placed them before us in black and white. See how they're describing a process, arguing with themselves? They had someone else help them. We got to find your part. Let's get after it. Okay. We admitted our wrongs honestly and were willing to set these matters straight. Why were we willing to set the matter straight?
Because we want to get rid of the thinking.
Yeah, how many of you have found that once you realized the part you played, just in enlightened self-interest, you wanted to go make it right?
Yeah.
Okay. Notice that the word fear is bracketed alongside the difficulties with Mr. Brown, Mrs. Jones, the employer, and the wife. This short word somehow touches every aspect of our lives. So now they've got us all the way back to the fear that caused the self to manifest, and we're going to start analyzing our fears and how they drive us. Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. It was an evil and corroding thread. The fabric of our existence was shot through with it. It set in motion trains of circumstances which brought us misfortune we felt we didn't deserve, but did we not ourselves set the ball rolling? That gets tricky when you're brand new, because you may have had all kinds of abuse heaped on you as a child or whatever, but I still have to find a part in it, even if my part is unforgiveness or not understanding, whatever it is. I've got to find it so I can use that experience. Whatever happened to me back then, I have been given enough grace to get through it, and I now am uniquely qualified to help others going through it, to encourage them. You've been given a gift of healing to offer to another, even through your most difficult circumstance. So who's feeling that? Some of you are feeling that. But only if you'll employ it. If you just keep it up here as knowledge, it won't free you. You've got to share it. Yes? Okay. So sometimes we think fear ought to be classed with stealing. It seems to cause more trouble. How many of you have been afraid to take an action because of whatever? What if I did that and then it took a long time? Or what if I did that and I didn't succeed? Any of those?
Yeah.
So that fear instantaneously stole your opportunity to become a better version of yourself before you even gave yourself a chance to try. How many of you have found that sometimes you have to try a few times before you succeed? Ask any athlete how many times they tried before they became pros. Right? Okay. So we reviewed our fears thoroughly. We put them on paper even though we had no resentment in connection with them. How many of you found that you had fears that had no outward manifestation? Who's had resentment? Everyone's had resentment. Who has had depression, either diagnosed or just experienced it and it wasn't diagnosed? Did you realize it was a real force? People telling you cheer up didn't help, that kind of shit. So it's anger without enthusiasm. The idea that you could stop, right? And then one day, pow, you're not doing it anymore. What did you do different that day? And why that day? If anyone can explain it, then you can sell lots of books. But the fact is, we have no idea why, right? And that's our encounter, and then we go through a process, and all of a sudden we've got what everyone calls willingness, but that's divine power. That came into me. At my most broken place, willingness came into me that I didn't previously. It wasn't that I didn't know this process existed. Anyone know what I'm talking about? I knew this existed. I wouldn't do it. Anyone else had that experience? Okay. Now I learned that would not and could not are synonymous. What difference does it make when I'm dying, whether I will or I won't? Or can't, right? All right. So, all men of faith have, the verdict of the age is that faith means courage. All men of faith have courage. They trust their God. We never apologize for God. Instead, we let Him demonstrate through us what He can do. So that's why I would bear witness to His love, His power, His way of life, because whatever's going on, it's got to be God, because I was a dead man. Anyone know what I'm talking about?
Oh,
Just
yeah.
an empty shell of a man. Just waiting for it to end, because I couldn't end it. I couldn't get it done. Okay. All right, so we ask Him to remove our fear and direct our attention to what He would have us be. At once we commence to outgrow fear. So that's our new manner of living. When I find myself experiencing fear and limiting thoughts, judgmental thoughts, please remove my fear, direct my attention to what You would have me be. He's the doer, I'm the being. That's why they call me a human being, not a human doing. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
Now about sex. Uh-oh.
Yeah.
Many of us needed an overhauling there, but above all, we tried to be sensible on this question. It's so easy to get way off the track. Here we find human opinions running to extremes. Absurd extremes, perhaps. One set of voices cry that sex is a lust of our lower nature, the base necessity of procreation. And then we have the voices who cry for sex and more sex, who bewail the institution of marriage, who think that most of the troubles of the race are traceable to sex causes. They think we don't have enough of it, or it isn't the right kind. They see its significance everywhere. One school would allow man no flavor for his fare, the other would have us all on a straight pepper diet. Do you recognize all the flowery language they're using to say we get confused about our
Yep.
sexual conduct a little bit? Any of you ever find out that sometimes you didn't think there was enough of it, or it wasn't the right kind, and other times you thought, don't touch me? Nobody's had that experience? Okay. Probably don't belong here. What they go on to tell us, we want to stay out of this controversy. Why do we want to stay out of this controversy?
Because we're not very good at it.
Because we're terrible at it. All I ever see is my thoughts about the situation. So if I'm mad because of what you're fixing to do, it's because I was hoping to do it and you got in my way.
True.
Probably.
Yeah.
Or something else.
Yeah.
We do not want to be the arbiter of anyone's sex conduct. We all have sex problems. We'd hardly be human if we didn't. If you're not human, of course, this doesn't apply to you. What can we do about them? So we've established a common human condition, and now we're going to take a look. Now that I'm a human condition with alcoholism, I'm a bit extreme, so I'm liable to have more troubles than some others. Yes?
Yeah.
Maybe not. Who knows? Okay. So what can we do about them now? I'm going in. What am I going to do? We reviewed our own conduct over the years past where we've been selfish, dishonest, or inconsiderate. So I'm going to go back in, even with the same way I looked at resentments, I'm going to go in and look at my relationship. I've got to find my part, or I'm going to keep having the lesson. I've got to find my part, or I haven't learned the lesson, which keeps presenting itself to me. The longer I refuse to learn the lesson I'm currently in, the longer the teaching will go on. Does that make sense? How many of you have had that experience? Sometimes it manifests a different teacher, but nonetheless it keeps going. Okay, so we reviewed our own conduct over the years past where we've been selfish, dishonest, or inconsiderate. So guys, this is going to be the essence of your 10th step for a lifetime, this paragraph on page 69. You'll know what questions to ask yourself in your thought life. There's question marks after them. What questions do I ask myself? The ones with questions after them. Page 69, middle of the page. Make sense? For a lifetime. Yes? Okay. All right, so whom had we hurt? Did we unjustifiably arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness? Where were we at fault? What should we have done? We got this all down on paper and looked at it. What's the beauty of that exercise once I learn that practice? I get disciplined in finding my part in every time I'm suffering in my thought life. And I'm going to extricate myself from that thought life sooner. Even if you hurt me, it won't hurt me for very long if I redirect my thinking. If I realize that perhaps you're spiritually sick. If I move into a forgiving place right away, I don't boil in that hurt.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. In this way, we tried to shape a sane and sound ideal for our future sex life. How many of you would like to have a future sex life?
Oh, please.
9 of you. The rest of you are lying. I know this because you're human. Would you like to have a sane and sound ideal for whatever type of future relationship life you have?
Yes.
This is what we don't explain to people. I don't know why everyone doesn't want to do an inventory when they find out the product of this is a sane and sound ideal for all my future relationships. How many of you found you had trouble with your human relationships with employers? Sure. With other people? How many of you came to AA or CMA or one of those fellowships and found out all those sons of bitches were not what they're hypocrite motherfuckers? Any of you ever had any of that happen? It would help to have a sane and sound ideal. They're not causing my suffering. I'm holding on to resentment. I don't know. I'm suffering from my thoughts. What am I seeing? How can I be helpful? Wouldn't it help to get into that helpful and forgiving space? Not for their benefit, for my benefit. Okay. So we subjected each relationship to this test. Was it selfish or not? How many of you found the depth of your delusion by whether or not something was selfish or not? You ever try and convince yourself that something you were doing was not selfish? Do you realize the minute you became aware you were doing it, self was involved? It's tricky shit, ain't it? So the idea is we've got to be directed by power greater than ourselves, because the minute we find ourselves in a state of being, we're out. That's why you're trying to improve consciousness of that. Ever thought you were doing something really selfless and thought, my, that was humble of her. Very humble. And your humility just fucking vaporizes when that, right? Where's my people that, have got yourself selfies of you being selfless? And we don't think, it's not we're saying anything's wrong, it's just how tricky this is, right? Okay, so we ask God to mold our ideals and help us live up to them, and we remember always that our sex powers were God-given and therefore good, never to be used lightly or selfishly, nor to be despised and loathed. Whatever our ideal turns out to be, we must be willing to grow toward it. Now, I've heard people try and tell us that that's a rule. I don't think that's the must they mean. The reason I went to the trouble of the inventory is that I want to get free of myself, my limiting thoughts about myself. So I must be willing to grow toward this ideal I've formulated with this power, or I wouldn't have gone to all this trouble. Does it make sense? Not a rule. It's kind of a no-brainer. I must be, or why did I do this? Because my mind will tell me I'm not ready to do that, even though I went through all this process to get ready to do that. You ever done that? Got yourself perfectly prepared and then were afraid to go out and take it for a run? How many of you did all the step experience except take someone else to the steps? So you never unpacked. What, did you have the fear that you were not good enough?
Yeah.
Of course you were. Who do you think assigned you that person?
God.
Everyone that you encounter that asks you for help, you were sent to by the power that delivered you, to bear witness, to learn something about you, to get the healing you need by offering it to them. Does that make, who's feeling that?
Yeah.
That's in you. That's not coming from up here. Okay. We must be willing to make amends where we've done harm, provided we not bring about still more harm in so doing. In other words, we treat sex as we would any other problem. So let's not get focused on sex, because everyone gets squishy about that. Relationships is what it's about.
Right.
Relationships from childhood to whatever have taught us lessons we're probably still employing because we didn't learn the lesson. And so we want to take a look at all these false ideas I have about me that I've learned from other sources. Does that make sense? So we ask God what we should do about each specific matter. The right answer will come if we want it. So what if I don't want it? That was a promising condition.
Ain't getting it.
How many of you have got it and then just rejected it? Say, nah. You haven't fully thought through the consequences, right? Me, the finite's telling the infinite what anyone know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Sometimes you just won't know it. But any message you need, you'll find you'll get it recurring. And you'll find that you're either dismissing it or you're moving in it. Have you ever had that happen? You ever had something come to you more than once before you were convinced, yeah, I better give this a go? Okay. All right, so God alone can judge our sex situation. Counsel with other persons is often desirable, but we let God be the final judge. Whatever is going on with you, get in the habit. The answers for you are in you. Everyone's got an opinion on who you should be at any given time. Even though we've taught, check it with your sponsor. I suggest to you, check it with anyone you want, but before you act, check it with the power within you. The answers for you are in you. Okay. All right, so we realize that some people are as fanatical about sex as others are loose. We avoid hysterical thinking or advice. Where do I find hysterical thinking or advice? In me and all other people. Exactly right. Because everyone else is telling me about an experience they had and trying to save me from it, or something of that nature, and maybe do you understand what okay. Suppose we fall short of a chosen ideal and stumble. Any of you been afraid to move forward because you might fail? Did you have a whole bunch of people saying, yeah, don't try that, you might fail? People will limit us because of their own fears. Don't allow fear to keep you from becoming a better version of yourself. Yours or somebody else's. Go inward. That's what this whole process was. By now you've got tangible power flowing through you. Talk to the power. Okay? Does this mean we're going to get drunk?
Nope.
Okay? Some people tell us so, but this is only a half truth. So some people get drunk, but some people just learn the lesson and start doing better. How many of you have learned hard lessons by behaving badly? How many of you have learned hard lessons by being treated badly? How many of you found that by getting treated badly and finding out there was power within you to be kinder than you felt like being and get into a forgiving spirit, you grew in spite of what happened to them? So did not every experience strengthen you? So we need to quit picking which ones are right or wrong and start embracing the moment so that we can become better version. Everything's preparing us for the next moment. Okay. All right, so it depends on us and our motives. If we're sorry for what we've done and have the honest desire to let God take us to better things, we believe we'll be forgiven, we'll have learned our lesson. So they've given you some conditions. If I'm sorry for what I've done and I'm willing to set it right, then I'm probably okay. If I'm not sorry for what I've done, it's probably going to continue. I'm going to chase that shit out there, and eventually I'm going to find myself in a dark spot. Have you ever found yourself in a dark spot? Okay. So if we're not sorry and our conduct continues to harm others, we're quite sure to drink. We're not theorizing. These are facts out of our own experience. So they're just talking. Powerless is not a theory. If I get too far out into unconscious behavior, eventually I'm going to numb my human condition some way. Yes? Have you had that experience? Okay. To sum up about sex, we earnestly pray for the right ideal, for guidance in each questionable situation, for sanity and for strength to do the right thing. If sex is very troublesome, we throw ourselves the harder into helping others. So the idea is always to offer yourself to others, and you'll get relieved of some of that bondage of self. That's the whole point, yes?
Yeah.
You understand that third step prayer when I'm asking to be relieved of the bondage of self? That's an ongoing experience. It's my limiting thoughts about me that cause me to go chase my ease and comfort in the world instead of going into the well of ease and comfort I've discovered within me. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so we think of their needs and work for them. This takes us out of ourselves. It quiets the imperious urge when to yield would mean heartache. How many of you have had the experience of not feeling too good, not thinking too good, the phone rang, someone needed help, you went out and helped them, you couldn't even remember what you were suffering about? It's true. And we don't tell people that enough. We tell people, go to a meeting and tell people what's going on with you. No. Go to a meeting and find out who needs help and offer that help to them. That's how you get free of self. Don't marinate in self. Get out of self. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. If we've been thorough about our personal inventory, we've written down a lot. How many of you found that out?
Yeah.
We have listed and analyzed our resentments. We've begun to comprehend their futility and their fatality. Notice how they're talking about beginnings.
Yeah.
I'm going to do a 4-step inventory, maybe 1, maybe 10, maybe 1 every year. I don't know. I've heard all kinds of suggestions. But it's a practice that I'm trying to learn to become disciplined in. I'm not always going to write it down on paper. I'm going to discipline my thought life on the fly. That's what the manner of living is. But if I don't get into the practice, do you understand? I won't even know what my thoughts are showing me until I've done that. Okay? So we've begun to comprehend their futility and their fatality. We've commenced to see their terrible destructiveness. So have you found yourself after you've done some work and you're working with others and all of a sudden you're trying to help somebody and they piss you off because they act like an addict?
It's true.
They're showing you your thoughts. They're showing you some self-loathing. Honor that. Right? Okay. So we've commenced to see their terrible destructiveness. We've begun to learn tolerance, patience, and goodwill toward all men, even our enemies, for we look upon them as sick people. See, as long as I have enemies, I have no peace in my thought life. Because peace is the absence of conflict. So if I'm going to know peace, a 9th-step promise, then I'm going to have an absence of conflict in my thought life. And the only way that happens is by me taking ownership of all these disagreements in my mind so I can get free of them. Does it make sense? Okay, so we have listed the people we have hurt by our conduct and are willing to straighten out the past if we can. And you see now why we're willing.
Yeah.
Because the straightening out of the past is the fitness. They're going to tell us later that that's the fitness step, the freedom step. How many of you have gone out and got physically fit in recovery or another time in your life? You notice you had to go do some exercises, push some weights. So what this is setting me up to know what my training exercise is going to look like in 9, because I'm going to go lift some weights to reduce my ego. Strengthen the spirit, reduce the ego. Does it make sense? Okay. So in this book you read again and again that faith did for us what we could not do for ourselves. So first, faith in a process, faith in a fellowship, and then eventually faith in a power once I get introduced. Yes? Okay. So we hope you're convinced now that God can remove whatever self-will has blocked you off from Him. Are you convinced yet in 4? Probably not, but it's a manner of living. How many of you have been convinced over time when you thought everything was lost and somehow you got through it? And then again, 3 weeks later, you think everything's lost, but you don't remember a week ago when you got through it. So this process starts to show us our faith develops, does it not? And then we start being free of that fear of, okay. All right, so if you've already made a decision and an inventory of your growths or handicaps, then you made a good beginning. That being so, you've swallowed and digested some big chunks of truth about yourself. Thanks. We'll see you next week.